I think I lost some of you guys earlier. I was basically just covering the idea that what we have is we have an appalling lack of integrity on display right now. That the messengers are being subordinated to an insurance policy. And if you're a pastor, if you're a Baptist leader, um, don't leave it up to me. Don't leave it up to Bart Barber. Don't leave it up to um, Russell Moore. Don't leave it up to Grant Gaines and Ronnie Parrott. All these voices are coming out. It's your voice that needs to be heard. It's your voice that needs to speak up. It's your voice that needs to say enough is enough. Because right now there's a meeting happening that says that your voice doesn't carry much weight. It doesn't matter if 16,000 of you, 17,000 of you spoke out clearly on this. It doesn't matter if you, it doesn't matter if you passed a motion in direct rebuke to the actions of the executive committee. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you have been absolutely explicit that the best practice of waiving attorney-client privilege because of your own mishandling of abuse should be followed. They've decided it doesn't matter. And it's time for messengers, it's time for Baptist pastors, it's time for leaders to speak up and tell them, actually, it does matter. What we say matters. You may not remember, but at the Southern Baptist Convention, there was a resolution passed called On Soul Membership. And that resolution ultimately says that the final authority in Baptist life with every entity rests not with presidents and not with CEOs, not with lawyers and not with insurance policies. It rests with the messengers. And right now, we're in executive session. And we had 24 minutes before they decided that we couldn't be part of the conversation. And there's a real question here. Do the lawyers represent the Southern Baptist Convention? Or do the lawyers represent the leaders who have mishandled abuse? Are they there to protect those who are in the wrong? Or are they there to carry out the will of the messenger? I think it's a real question. Todd Binkert, I added you as a speaker. You're welcome to share. The only reason I'm doing this is because I'm just like pulling my hair out at how obvious this is, but why we can't get it right.
I don't know that I have anything helpful to contribute. I mean, I'm just aghast that this is where we are. That I assume that what Dr. Frank has sent out to the trustees and to us, the messengers, is accurate. And I don't see how every reasonable option has been rejected. I'm quite sure that the executive session is the lawyers that the leaders hired telling them why the reasonable the reasonable things that the task force came up with are in fact unreasonable. I mean, I'm thinking ahead already beyond this meeting. I have a slight ray of hope until it's over, but I'm not dependent on this meeting.
Yeah, I think if you're on here, just so you know, you may not have read this. So let's just read it here. We have an update from the sexual abuse task force that came out today. Dear Executive Committee member, representatives of the task force spent all yesterday meeting with the Executive Committee officers. We are disappointed that the majority of the officers still will not follow the will of the messengers and waive privilege. The task force believes that it is the best route to take morally and legally, which, by the way, there is a lawyer on the task force. So these aren't just ignorant pastors, right? There are professionals here. Not following the direct motion of the messengers is an unprecedented choice by the executive committee leadership. Consequences, both financially and vocationally, are in the hands of the messengers. The task force appreciates the leadership and integrity of Chairman Roland Slade. Well, at least we got one. However, we do not believe the new EC lawyers were acting in good faith or in good knowledge of SBC polity. What the task force is telling you is that the EC has hired lawyers to represent their opinion and defend their attorney client privilege that will protect them and the mistaken actions they have taken, but they don't even understand how the SBC works. So the task force goes on. They say, we then presented alternatives, attempting in good faith to address concerns regarding potential insurance difficulty, financial oversight, etc. The best alternative, which is generally called special master process and does not waive privilege, this would have guideposts continuing in their work and would produce a report that would be thorough and without the ability of the EC to edit or revise. For documents that the EC deems to be privileged, a special master would review the appropriateness of the privilege and provide non-privileged information to Guidestone. This process would not prevent the EC from waiving privilege during the investigation, and the task force hoped the EC would consider this option. So they're clearly going a long way here, trying to make a compromise. The majority of the EC officers seemed to be in agreement and went to meet with the new EC attorneys. The EC officers then returned with a brand new contract from their lawyer that had the EC in charge of another law firm that would conduct the entire investigation under privilege and allow Guideposts to support it as requested by the EC appointed law firm. So, like, you're not even allowed to be in this third party that we've hired unless we ask you to. They said the task force role is that it could be briefed from time to time on the progress of the report. Gee, thanks. Of course, this was totally unacceptable to us, as well as the clear will of the messengers. They eventually said that the special master process was doable as long as the EC hires the special master. So they can do it, but they have to have the person who is the subjective party on their payroll. The task force answer was no. In the end, we gave them several options: waive privilege, original contract with minor corrections, special master process without waiving privilege, or the hybrid model where we choose a law firm to come in under privilege and Guidepost conducts the investigation and issues a non-privileged report. If neither one or two are chosen, the task force intends to sign the contract and operate without EC approval, but based on the authority given by the SBC motion. Sincerely, the SBC Special Task Force. So, again, just to be clear, what you have here is the EC coming back to them after a compromise clearly seemed to have been kind of close and saying, actually, what we think would be best would be for us to control the entire process, top to bottom, for us to be the hiring party that brings in an outside law firm, for us to be able to tell Guideposts what they're allowed to know and what they're not allowed to know. They want control over the investigation. They want control over the information that gets to Guideposts, and they want to have edit authority over the final report. So not only do they want to control what goes into the report, if they decide that the report doesn't work for them, they want to make sure that you as a messenger, you as a pastor, you as a Southern Baptist Church do not get to see it. This is unacceptable. Dana McCain, you are on here. You
Yes.
are in a family of lawyers. I know that your husband, who's a lawyer that I know, has been actively talking about this with you.
Yes.
Is this our only option?
I do not want to represent my opinions as legal counsel coming from him, because it is not that. So let me tack that disclaimer to the front of it.
Yes, thank
But
you.
but I will say this. I tweeted this a while ago. I have had a front row seat to a million rounds of civil litigation, where I have, had the privilege of knowing a lot about the facts of the case and the legal theories used. And this is what concerns me about today. And let me just say this too. I, like many of you, have over the course of many years sat on a large number of boards where we have handled sensitive issues, hiring, firing, potential litigation. And the only time I have ever voted to go into executive session and cut myself as a board member off from the stakeholders of that organization is when we were discussing the good name and character of an individual. That is not what is happening right now. What is happening right now is a discussion of legal counsel that has been given based upon what might happen in an investigation that has not yet commenced. So there's no way we're dealing with the facts of the cases today, or any potential claim that may emerge from this investigation. We're just talking about various legal strategies and how they may or may not strengthen or weaken the EC's position legally in this process. And we're also discussing how our legal strength or weakness may increase the exposure to our insurance carrier. Now, I understand and you understand that an insurance carrier is a business, and their business model is to reduce exposure. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know exactly what the legal counsel from the insurance carrier is going to say. They're going to say, we would absolutely prefer for you to maintain your attorney client privilege throughout this process because that helps you maintain a better posture in terms of legal strategy and thus reduce our exposure. So that's a slam dunk. We knew that before this started. And additionally, we know that standard legal counsel to any individual or organization would be to retain your privilege because that gives you some wiggle room and it gives you some cover on some things that you would not legally be forced to reveal otherwise. We all knew this in June when we drafted and passed this motion. And
And Dana, the guidepost lawyer said last week, in what instances would you ever waive your privilege? Well, we've seen waivers of privilege from government organizations, from our government agencies, from the University of Michigan, from other major higher education institutions. And why was privilege waived? Why would it ever be waived? Because there's an overwhelming burden of proof that wrongdoing has been committed and they have decided they want the full truth rather than self-protection. And she said it outright, and we still don't care.
exactly. And so listen, y'all, in every phase of life, as a nonprofit organization, as a church, as individuals, as business people, we are going to have moments where good business practice and good legal strategy rub up against morality and holiness. And as the body of Christ, we better know when we get up before we get to those crossroads which way we're going to go when we get there. I don't understand why I
Bart
have to
Barber,
explain this to a room full of pastors.
Bart, if you're willing to jump on here as a speaker, I would love to have you talk about Baptist polity here. We passed a resolution this summer, of course. For those listening, I'm inviting him as a speaker. Maybe he'll join, maybe he won't. We passed a resolution on sole membership that says that the final authority for the practice of our entities rests with the messengers. So in a year where we pass a resolution on sole membership, in a year where we overwhelmingly pass a rebuke to the executive committee's decision to not give full transparency, here we are watching them try to do everything in their power to undo that. Bart, would you share with us?
I don't know what to share with you about. I drove through a spot where my connection wasn't good for a second, and I heard Bart, and that was it. So I have no idea what you were asking.
Yeah, no, you're good. All I was asking is if you could just talk to us about the polity ramifications of the SBC and what they're attempting to do right
Sure.
now.
I think one of the most important things for everybody to understand right now is the relationship between polity and law. Polity is what we believe about the way we ought to be governed. And we would believe the same things. We think these are biblically based ideas. We would believe the same things about how we ought to be governed, whether we were organized in California or China, or wherever we might be. And then under the law of each particular place, you start asking lawyers how to accomplish what it is that you believe is right about the way you should be governed. And so our idea in polity is that the churches are the organization that Jesus founded, and that the churches cooperate with one another to do the work of missions, the Great Commission, and that that the churches retain control of what's happening in the work of the convention. And the convention is autonomous. The executive committee is autonomous. Those are the legal structures that we have put in place. But it is the job of the attorneys not to tell us what we do, but to help us accomplish what it is that we need to do in a legal way. And so our polity, it's completely legal for the SBC executive committee to say, we don't care what the messengers have said. We're just going to do what we think is the right thing to do. That's completely legal. The lawyers are right about that. But it is 100% antithetical to our polity. And it's a nuclear option that we've always known was there, but that people have had better sense than to better sense than to pull the trigger on that up to this point, because it's terribly damaging to the trust that holds this whole thing together. And so I think I hope everybody, if they know me well enough, knows that I am committed to the idea of our working through our processes and trying to maintain peace. I don't want to be a bomb thrower, but honestly, if the clear vote of the messengers, I don't think you can interpret what the messengers said in Nashville in any way apart from an explicit message to say we don't trust the executive committee to do this.
Well, and Bart, if I could just
Yeah.
jump in here, you weren't on our last call. The last time we did this, Grant Gaines told us that Ronnie Floyd personally came to him before they offered the motion in private and asked them to remove the language about the waiver of privilege because he knew the implications of this if the messengers insisted upon it. Of course, Grant and Ronnie didn't do that, and the messengers overwhelmingly voted in favor of it. So it's not as if the messengers stumbled into
Right.
this or the EC didn't know what was going on. This has been a willful campaign against this motion and against the messengers from the
Yeah, the
beginning.
messengers have given a clear indication of what they believe and whom they trusted. And really, the job of the executive committee right now is to regain the trust of the Southern Baptist churches that support them. And what they're doing right now is the absolute opposite of that. And, the nuclear option for the executive committee is to say, we are legally entitled to do whatever we want to. That's what we're going to do. The nuclear option for churches is to say, fine, we don't have to send you any money. I don't think either of those nuclear options is a good way to go, but I worry that's where we're headed.
Yeah, I mean the word fiduciary responsibility has been batted around like crazy. Oh, we got to protect the messengers. Meanwhile, we've got IMB missionaries on social media saying, "Hey, don't do this for us. Do what is right. Do right by these abuse victims." I mean, you can go to my Twitter feed. I see I retweeted one of them today, who's an IMB missionary. Say, "Hey, our staff has talked. If we have to come off the field because you've mishandled this, we should still do what is just and trust God." We've got, we've got that group speaking out loudly here. We've got messengers who voted 95% plus in favor of this motion. And I think you're right. The language of nuclear option is right. I mean, Bart, how are we supposed to understand the leadership decisions at the executive committee right now? I mean, they're not informing trustees. They're not getting them their information on time before their last meeting. They're hiring lawyers to defend themselves against the messengers. They're insisting on executive session for pretty much the entirety of this conversation. What are we supposed to think about the leadership decisions we're seeing?
Well, I think if I'm if I'm going to wander into personal opinion about all of this, I'll tell you, this is not the strongest moment in Southern Baptist history for the practice of our congregational polity in our churches. And I worry that as we put more and more people into positions of influence in our entities who really don't have much of a track record of ever having to answer to anybody for anything that they've done, and don't have very much of a track record in their church ministry experience of ever having to really persuade people. You just come in and say, this is what we're going to do, and you don't really have to build consensus. Then I think it portends bad outcomes for us at the national level in our entities, to the degree that we do that kind of thing. It really, the leadership smacks of just a tremendous fear of what could happen if an independent investigation happened, and also I just call it what my mama would call it, a tremendous stubbornness about we're not going to be told what to do.
That's right. Yeah, it's so inconsistent with who we are, what we say we believe, what our polity is, even our little cliches. The headquarters of the SBC is the local church. Is it? Is it? Because the local churches gathered, they gave clear directions, and you're fighting tooth and nail. I mean, I can't help but wonder if the only two people who are privy to the information that is currently covered by attorney-client privilege are fighting tooth and nail to make sure that the rest of us don't see it, then what on earth is covered by privilege? It's extremely concerning. The response to the direction of messengers is extremely concerning. If I interpreted the Bible the way that the executive committee is interpreting this motion, they'd call me a liberal.
Hey, Griffin, I have a question. Earlier, before we shut down and then started a new space, you were
Yeah.
talking about the letter from the task force that became available this morning. Is that
Mm-hmm.
did I understand you to say in reading that through the course of yesterday's negotiations, the EC officers moved the goalposts back from even wanting guideposts to do the investigation anymore?
Yeah. So if you weren't on earlier, we had a connection problem earlier, and a lot more of you are on now anyway. The Sexual Abuse Task Force. So just to be clear, this is not just Griffin talking here. I'm not running the grapevine here. This is a statement from the Sexual Abuse Task Force, from Bruce Frank, from Andrew Hebert, from the lawyers who are on the task force and others. They said in their statement that when an agreement on a waiver of privilege, or at least a secondary option where there would be a special master who would review privileged documents and then release non-privileged information to the guidepost for review, when they were close to an agreement there, they took it back to the lawyers of the EC. And then the lawyers of the EC came back to them with an entirely different contract, the contents of which said that the EC would be dictating, they would be hiring a group to conduct the investigation, that they would then share information at their discretion with Guidepost and the third party group, with the Sexual Abuse Task Force, and that group would be under their payroll and at their say so on what gets released to the task force and what doesn't. And you can go again. I'm just summarizing here, but go to my profile and you will see it. I retweeted. I retweeted that actual, or quote tweeted that actual statement. You can read it for yourself. Just don't just take my word for it. Go and read it for yourself. And it's absolutely infuriating. I'll read the relevant portion to you. It says here, EC officers then returned with a brand new contract from their lawyer that had the EC in charge of another law firm that would conduct the entire investigation under privilege and allow Guidepost to support it as requested by the EC appointed law firm. They said that the task force role is that it could be briefed from time to time on the progress of the report. I mean, this is utter nonsense that the group who's going to be investigated is going to hire a fourth party, and that party will be in charge of the investigation on the dime of the executive committee. and then they will release information to guideposts on an as-needed basis. And then the role of the Sexual Abuse Task Force, which was appointed by the president of the Southern Baptist Convention by the will of the messengers, their only role in this is that they will occasionally receive updates as needed. If that is not infuriating to you, I don't know what to.
Well, it's operating in bad faith. Point. Up until this point, we have had this discussion wherein the
Tell you, I
narrative
mean, that is a
was
complete subversion. Absolutely.
so. Up until this point, the dialogue among the various parties here has been that we all agree about where it is we want to go, and we all agree that Guidepost is the right organization to do the investigation, and we all agree that we want to be as transparent as possible. We're just struggling with the methodology a little bit. But that move yesterday, where they tried to demote Guidepost and hired their own law firm to really be the lead dog on the sled of this investigation, is that is going exactly against the spirit, not just the minutia of the motion that was passed in June.
And I think, Dana, just to say out loud what some of you might be thinking is, some of you may not agree with me on this. That's fine. Some of you may get mad to hear me say this, but the idea that you could trust Ronnie Floyd and Greg Addison and these lawyers at this point with that kind of effort is nonsense. It's nonsense. This is the most bad faith leadership failure since the conservative resurgence. I mean, you want to talk about saying we believe in the authority of Scripture, and then working to undermine it at every step. Okay, now let's apply that kind of standard to this case. Oh yeah, we'll stand up on stage after the motion is passed, and we'll say, "We hear you." And then we're going to come out and release a statement and tweet. Help us. We're going to tweet an action shot speaking at the executive committee with a quote about how much you care about abuse victims, and you're going to stand and clap for them. And then you're going to send back a contract that says you control the investigation and that the Sexual Abuse Task Force can get updates from you if you think that they need them. That is to use Bart's words from earlier on a different part of this, that is a complete and utter break of trust. It's a break of trust. I don't see how you can interpret this any other way. I mean, I said it earlier. I'm not afraid to say it again. We need new lawyers and we need new leaders. I can't believe just the audacity of thinking that you don't need to heed even remotely what the messenger said. Not only are you not going to be transparent in the way they've dictated for you to be transparent, you're going to completely ignore their task force. I mean, come on.
Hey, Griffin.
I mean, I feel like I'm taking crazy pills here.
Can a Texan jump in here for just a second?
Yeah, absolutely.
So my daughter has decided that she's going to raise a couple of Santa Gertrudis heifers to take to shows, cattle shows. Santa Gertrudis is a breed of cow, for those of you from other places, and so we're in the process of breaking them, teaching them to follow our guidance, to go where we want them to go, to be docile when they're in an arena with other people. Those heifers weigh 10 times what I weigh. And they could fold me in half if they wanted to without really much effort. But even though they are bigger and more powerful than we are, you can convince them that they're not. That's what the process of breaking them is about. It's about convincing them that they're not. And I just think everybody who's been involved in bringing this motion, seeing it passed at the SBC annual meeting, I think everybody needs to realize that even though the executive committee is kind of tugging on the halter right now, we're bigger than they are. And what happens today may be very disappointing, but the only way that the wrong outcome comes out of this is if we say, oh, well, I guess we lost. At that point, we're like that heifer, and we haven't realized we're actually the biggest player in this arena. So uh, I just encourage everyone to remember there's an annual meeting coming up
You're a
in
heifer.
Anaheim. Yeah.
If you're on this call right now, you're a heifer. And you better remember that. From Bart Barber's mouth to your ears.
So I think I made my point.
Yeah. I sometimes I see what's happening right now in the SBC and I think, man, the writers this season are really on the nose. They need to dial it back a little bit because we're talking about an executive committee that authorized an investigation of the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, produced a report in a special subcommittee that said that George Soros was funding the ERLC, accused them of all sorts of evils, none of which are true or verifiable, angry ultimately about the politics of the ERLC, which on every major issue they could point to a Southern Baptist Convention resolution as justification for their actions, and then produce that report in such a way that they didn't have to bring it back to the full EC for a vote. So it's just out there as if it was passed, but it wasn't. That's what they did. Sort of under the dark of night, they produced this false, unverifiable report full of conspiracy theory and published it. Now, with Jen Lyle's entire body of evidence for how she was libeled and settled with them, now with just bukus of evidence, excuse the Alabama phrase, that they have mistreated abuse victims at every step, with Augie Bodo having testified as a character witness for a sexual abuse cover-up in his official role as an executive committee vice president. With all of this evidence, they are fighting tooth and nail an investigation. Golly, when they're at some point when there's smoke, there's fire, and there's so much smoke in here that you can't breathe. Dana, you were at the SBC. You were on the resolutions committee.
Yes.
Is there any reason to believe that the messengers were divided or uneducated on this motion?
I don't think so at all. Based on, the messengers that I spoke to who were there, who were supportive of that motion. And I know this is not highly scientific, but those of you who have been to an SBC annual meeting know that you can sort of feel the temperature of the room at certain points. When a motion is being introduced or when a resolution is being introduced, you usually know about how it's going to go before the ballots are even raised. And as Grant was reading the language of that motion, it felt like the room was in wholehearted agreement about both the spirit and the actual nuts and bolts of what he was putting forth. And then, of course, the vote confirmed that. So no, I don't believe that there was any confusion. It was not a close vote. And I made this point in an op-ed that I published on Monday. There was a little bit of talk in last week's EC meeting about, bless the messenger's hearts. They're doing the best they can, but they just don't understand this big fancy legal stuff and civil litigation and liability and insurability. And I thought about the group of messengers that I traveled to the annual meeting with that included an elected official and an entrepreneur and another business owner and an attorney of 25 years. And I was like, I just don't buy that. I do not buy that. There are a lot of people from a lot of walks of life in that room, and they all bring unique experiences and knowledge to the votes they make as messengers of the SBC. Do I always agree with the room? No. But I just don't think that we lack the capacity to understand the types of issues that make up the contours of this current situation.
And you know who's standing on the stage at the Southern Baptist Convention ready to advise the messengers if they decide that anything is illegal or outside of our charter or beyond what we're able to do? Who's standing on the stage is the lawyers of the Southern Baptist Convention. And they had their opportunity to educate the messengers if they thought we were ignorant or ill-informed. And instead, right now, at this very second, the full board of the executive committee is in a Zoom room with two law firms, one of which has been retained for the sole purpose of fighting against a waiver of privilege, contrary to the messenger's wishes. There is no law firm there to represent what the messengers actually said that they should do, and they are getting a full-throated argument that apparently is privileged. Why are we even on this Twitter Spaces conversation?
Right.
Because you and I aren't allowed to hear. We're not allowed to hear what they have to say.
And
And so we're uneducated plebes. But hey, just trust them. Just trust the people who are going to be investigated in the first place. Trust the EC leadership who hired the lawyers to subvert you. Trust the people who mishandled a case of abuse. Trust the EC leadership who settled a case out of court with Jen Lyle just last year. Trust the group who has repeatedly stonewalled and mistreated victims over the last 2 decades. Just trust them. They'll do it their best. Let's pray. Absolutely not. Andrew Aber, you're on here from the Sexual Abuse Task Force. Why don't you share with us whatever you can? I know y'all didn't sign a confidentiality agreement. Will you share with us your experience as a member of the Sexual Abuse Task Force?
Hey, Griffin. I think my
Andrew.
reception is not great right now, so I apologize if I cut out.
I
would
hear
just
you
tell
clearly.
you that what we put in our report today is accurate. I was in that meeting for nearly 8 hours yesterday, and honestly, we had a good, fruitful discussion with most of the EC officers until an EC lawyer stepped into the room, and things digressed from there, period. That's been the whole story behind the scenes. It's not been helpful. I don't think they have a good grasp of our polity, and they have no desire to accommodate what the messengers clearly asked for. It has all been about how to avoid this, and so I'm hopeful.
Andrew, didn't the executive committee pass a motion that said that the negotiation was only between the officers and the task force? What was the executive committee staff doing there as part of the negotiation in the first place?
Well, we had no EC staff in the room. So it was, for most of the day, it was just 4 officers. And then me, Bruce, Marshall, and Rachel Den Hollander. So like I said, those conversations were fruitful. It was very clear that waiving privilege was not something that was really going to be an option. But we were starting to work on productive alternatives. And so you saw in our press release today that we had 2 ways of structuring that. One would be for the use of a special master process. And then the other would be kind of structuring it through an attorney that the task force hired. Either of those options would have accommodated an investigation, though it would not be fully thorough. They wouldn't be accessed necessarily to privileged documents. But again, at every juncture, the EC lawyers wanted to try to take control of the process, and that's just simply a no-go for us. So that's the reason that the task force was established in the beginning. It's clear to us that the messenger's directive was to take this out of the hands of the EC. So we're not going to budge on that. And I'm sorry, Griffin, I've got to run here in a minute, but I would just let anybody know who would like to know that our task force is unified in fulfilling the will of the messengers. We do not have the authority to waive privilege for the EC. So we ultimately cannot make them waive privilege, but we're not going to compromise on those other aspects, and certainly not going to hand this thing over to them.
Thanks, Andrew. I appreciate your commentary there. I'm grateful the Sexual Abuse Task Force did not sign a confidentiality agreement, because I think we have every reason to believe that a press release would have been given saying it was great, everything's great, and we're going to come back, with this recommendation. We wouldn't know the truth. How are we supposed to trust a group of leaders that operate in the dark, that operate in secrecy, that lie to us about what has been done and what they're doing? I mean, I'm not trying to be a prophet or a son of a prophet here, but we have been lied to. We've been misled. We've been told things along the way that aren't true. Information has been withheld. And look, I'm just an Alabama boy, but my mom always told me growing up that a half truth is a whole lie. And I can't think of a single whole truth we've gotten this entire time. All I can look at is times where we're given just enough information that's supposed to shut us up and send us away. And this summer, with that kind of tactics in play, over 15,000 messengers said, Special Sexual Abuse Task Force, complete independence from the staff of the executive committee, hire a third party, do an investigation, waive attorney-client privilege, give us transparency. And the EC is looking you in the face right now and they're saying no. And if you're a rank and file Southern Baptist on this call, your voice needs to be heard. It's time to speak up. I'm going to add as a speaker here, Jules Woodson. Jules is one of the abuse victims that has been very prominent in this case. Jules, I'm not going to ask you any questions. You just say whatever you want to say.
Hey, well, in the words of Bart Barber, hey heifers. We all need a little
That's going to be
laugh.
really weird for
We
people
all
that
need a
missed that
little laugh
earlier.
right now. But yeah, sorry if you missed that. It's not derogatory in any way. But I just wanted to say several things here. What you guys are witnessing, and please excuse me if I get emotional, what you guys are witnessing now, and I know a lot of you, just since even the convention last year in Nashville, are like kind of being awakened to this. But this is not new for survivors. We have been fighting tooth and nail for years. For years, me personally, since January of 2018. But you look at people like Krista Brown, who 15 plus years has been saying these things. So I know this seems overwhelming. I mean, it's overwhelming for me, and I've been dealing with it for a long time. So I can imagine people just coming on the scene kind of being bewildered, but I appreciate the willingness to listen to us, because truly, I can't remember who said it, but it's like, you know, in some ways they just think, oh, well, we're the leadership, we can do what we want, and everybody's just going to follow along like sheep. And finally the messenger said, you know what, no, we're not going to. And so I just want to encourage that resolve. We are seeing, just this past week, and what happened yesterday that was made public by the task force today, the inexcusable behavior from leadership. And they are not following the will of the messengers. They are not doing the right thing. And this is not only moral, this is biblical. And I'd like to say I'm shocked, but I'm not anymore. But I know there's a lot of people who are experiencing shock right now. I want to encourage people, no matter what happens today, this is not the end. And
Yeah.
survivors who are on here, I want you to know I love you more than anything in this whole world. And this is not the end. And I'm so glad I have each and every one of you. I don't know where I'd be without you. And I also just want to publicly give mad props, major credit to the task force. I was blessed. Sorry. I was
Well, you're
blessed
fine.
with getting to meet with them in person about a month ago. And I can tell you, I was, besides nervous, I had so many emotions going on because for years, we've asked and pleaded for someone to listen, to pay attention, to act. And I want to say that I have never seen an SBC assembled group have such an amazing posture towards survivors. And I say that with my whole heart, as hard as it is for me to trust in these things anymore. I was thoroughly impressed with the sexual abuse task force. These people are doing their research. Um, they're smart. They are um, praying on their knees. They are doing all the right things. And as you just
Yeah.
heard Andrew say, we are not backing down. And I just want to encourage all of the messengers that are listening today, like no matter what happens today, this is not the end. And as Bart Barber said, we're the heifers in the situation, and we have more control than we think we have. And I know, like I said, it's bewildering to have your leaders tell you, oh, well, this is the right thing to do. But there's a lot more to it. And gosh, I hate to say it, but kind of common sense.
Yeah. No, you're
Along with
right. And
biblical principles and moral principles and all of that. And so,
if
I
you
don't
weren't
know.
on earlier, Bart Barber was talking about how you train and whip a steer or a heifer. You you break them, but they don't realize that they're bigger and stronger. And if they chose to fight back, they'd have no chance. I think, and again, this whole conversation makes me feel like I'm putting my tinfoil hat on. But you
Mm,
also, if you're listening to this, you need to understand how the SBC works relationally, not just in polity. I hope you all recognize that not a single Southern Baptist Convention entity president has come out in favor or support of the plan from the executive committee leadership. Not one. I hope that you recognize that there is a incredibly minute, small group of people who are defending the actions of the executive committee. The silence is deafening right now of those who supposedly support the executive committee. There is no institutional support from what they're doing. There are rumors that behind the scenes they are being told, you cannot do this, you must not do this. The other leaders understand what this means for their entities, for their institutions. You you have to look around at what's happening relationally. Consider that this week, Rod Martin, a trustee on the executive committee, tweeted or had a picture tweeted of him hanging out with Paige Patterson with the caption, "Good times." We're talking about a man who has actively worked to cover up sexual abuse at multiple institutions, who is currently embroiled in a lawsuit over that very thing. We're talking about a man who was fired from Southwestern for this, and who he and his associates are at the heart of the need for the investigation. And we've got an executive committee trustee who was a committee chairman for the executive committee last year sharing pictures that say good times. This is not
it's truly
conspiratorial. This is obvious. They're
unfathomable.
doing it. Yeah, they're doing it out in the open. I mean, we libel victims in public. We hold hands with Paige Patterson in public. We protect ourselves in the background. We protect ourselves in silence and in dark rooms and in an executive session. I'm going to add another speaker here, though, someone who
Griffin,
has just
before you
requested
do
to
that,
speak.
Griffin, before you just
Yeah.
ask one more favor.
Yeah.
really
Jules, I don't think we can hear you.
can you hear me?
I am having a lot of trouble hearing you. Still
Better now.
having
I
trouble.
apologize. I'm driving.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
If you would prayer for survivors real quick, that would be really meaningful and cherished. And this is a hard day for everybody, but um, we have so much vested in this. So
Can you tell me again what you said at the very beginning? I missed you because of your cell reception.
I apologize. I'm driving, but I just asked that maybe if you could just say a quick prayer for survivors, lead us all in prayer for survivors. This is a tough day for everybody, but it's monumental for survivors. So I just want
Yeah.
to remind them that no matter what happens, God is in control, not 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 officers and
Yeah.
executive committee members. So if you could do that, that would be great.
Yeah. I would be happy to. And let me just say, this is not a story with just villains. This is not a story with just wrongdoers. This is a story with heroes. And the heroes are those of you victims who have been strong enough to stand up, to call us to account, to not let this just slip by, and who have voiced repeatedly and spoken up. And I want you to know that I'm grateful for you. I stand with you, and I think there are hundreds of people on this call who stand with you as well. I don't think I'm special. I don't think I'm a man of unique. I think that you will find that those on this call and many hundreds and thousands of others are with you. And I hope that the actions in the days ahead reflect that. But if you're on this call, I'm going to do what Jules just asked. And I am going to lead us in a short word of prayer. Father, we come to you. We come to you frustrated. And we come to you knowing that you will bring what is done in darkness into the light. And we know that you are a God of justice. You're a God of comfort. And we ask for all three: justice for those who have been hurt, for those who have been maligned, for those who have been mistreated, abuse has been mishandled. Lord, we ask for mercy for ourselves, for our failures, for our mistakes, for our unwillingness, for our action. Lord, we ask for comfort, comfort for the abused, comfort for the victim. Just be the silence of not supporting bad plans, but that you would give us the courage to speak out for what is right and insist. Pray for the members now that you would give them wisdom and discernment to do what is right, and give them courage in the room to speak out and not be pushed around. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Anything like that? I thought maybe we could take some questions. Dana, I think you're still muted. If you'd like to jump in on this conversation, you have the option to request. So I want to give you that option now. You can request to speak. You can request to ask a question. Dana McCain is here on this call. I will be here as well. We'll do this for a few more minutes, and then after that, we got to go. I don't have all evening to carry this conversation forward, but I think it's important that we get out in public and out on the record that there is an effort right now being undertaken to subvert the will of the messengers and do everything they can to keep their misdeeds from full transparency. I'm going to add Josh Gussler as a speaker here. Josh, you have an option to talk.
Hey, so one question: does anybody know if they're going to come back out of executive session? And second of all, if they don't, if this goes the way we're all thinking it is, the investigation's over. They've made their decision, and we have a responsibility. The motion that was made on our own.
Yeah, I think we fully expect them to come out of executive session to at least close this session in public. The vote exactly how long the parliament in this session, but I think we have every reason to believe that the executive session will end. But I think there are a lot of us who agree here in the ways laid out by the Sexual Abuse Task Force and the third party investigative body, that for all intents and purposes, the investigation, as far as its trustworthiness, will be limited. Now, Guidepost will still be running the investigation. And let's say that the report that will be given by Guidepost at the Southern Baptist Convention or by the Sexual Abuse Task Force as engaging the services of Guidepost, that report will not be produced with the edit authority of the executive committee, but they will be limited by claims of attorney-client privilege as they examine these questions. So I'm going to add as a speaker here Brent Hobbs. Brent? Brent, you're on.
Hey, Griffin, just to answer the question earlier, I believe when the meeting comes back into regular session, you should be able to refresh your page and there will be a new feed that pops up, maybe called session 2 or something like that. So when that happens, we should all know it kind of at the same time if you're watching your page and refreshing it. Just wanted to update that since that question was asked a minute ago.
Yeah, that's right. And it is important to say here, I just got some information from a trustworthy source that they do not have to come out of session. They can do all of this inside of executive session. I think there are good reasons to believe, given Chairman Roland Slade's leadership here, that they probably will come out of executive session. And as far as the trustworthiness of this report from Guidepost, just to reiterate, even if there are things that are subject to the lawyerly opinion of the executive committee, if the victims are copied on these things, if the victims have an opportunity to speak, if the victims have recordings, if they have records, if they have documentation, if they have settlements, if they have legal documents, anything, all of that can go. All of that can go to the third party. Any former employee, any current employee of this group who chooses to speak is able to speak. And so it is not the case that if they don't waive attorney-client privilege, that somehow we're not going to get a report. We just need to recognize that report will be done against the best efforts of an executive committee who has done everything in their power to resist full transparency. And again, if you're just joining this call, I just want to say again, you have to ask yourself, who does the executive committee serve? Do we trust a staff leadership at the executive committee who uses cooperative program dollars, who uses our time, our money to hire lawyers to fight against us in private explicitly against the wishes of the messengers, not even seeing the need to have a law firm on who would represent the position reflected in the initial motion. That's incredibly concerning.
That's something that I kind of wanted to speak to, Griffin. I did have a conversation a few days ago. It was the day after the EC took their vote with a member of the EC that I know and love and respect, who voted no on Jared's proposed amendment, and so I reached out to that person and said, I want you to help me understand, the rationale behind your vote. And that person shared with me in confidence, how much they relied upon the advice of legal counsel that was present there or that had reported there. And I pointed out, but that particular legal counsel is hired by and serves the interest of the EC. Where
Exactly.
is the legal counsel that the interest of the messengers? Because to my understanding, there is no such legal counsel in our current infrastructure of SBC Life, and that is a glaring structural flaw.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And hey, just to point out, the EC had no problem easily passing $500,000 worth of funding from cooperative program dollars for lawyers to defend themselves in the last meeting. That's not, I didn't misspeak there. They allocated $500,000 of cooperative program dollars. How many missionaries is that? I don't know, maybe 10. If they're getting paid what a lot of Southern Baptist pastors are. $500,000 to defend themselves for special lawyers beyond the legal services already provided for the SBC. No problem allocating dollars to defend themselves, although we heard a great outcry about spending cooperative program dollars to potentially offer aid, support, and therapy for victims. So I think that tells you a little bit about priorities here. I'm going to let Zach, I'm going to say this wrong. Actually, you know what? I just got a text, and this is important to say. Jordan and Gunther, who are the EC and convention attorneys, in the midst of this, Dana, here's the sick irony of this whole situation. Because the attorney-client privilege that's at stake in this whole conversation about possibly mishandling abuse involves conversations that come from the EC and convention's lawyers, they have recused themselves in representing the convention because it's actually their legal advice that's at stake here. And so we have lawyers. They're just not able to function on our behalf because they've been party to the mistreatment of victims that is under investigation in the first place. Where do you put that in the dictionary next to cruel irony? Want to invite Zach Van Giesen. I think that's how you say it. I'm sorry, Zach. You just have one of those names.
Yeah.
Probably happened your whole life. But I want to invite you to speak.
Yeah.
Here.
Thanks, brother. It's Van Giesen. Appreciate you giving me the opportunity.
Hey,
I'm a
got it.
bivocational pastor just down the road from you, I think, in Oxford, Alabama. I'm currently in my full-time job office right now. I hope they forgive me. And but the question that I have, and I appreciate all of you friends being on here, is if this goes the way that we anticipate, I just want to be clear. I've never had any ill will towards Ronnie Floyd. In fact, until the convention, I was willing to give him a lot more benefit of the doubt than I am today. But what mechanism, if any, do we have to call for his resignation before Anaheim? Because leadership sets the direction and the tone. And I think it's all clear here. The obfuscation and the complete, and I mean, the absolute lack of ethics involved in asking Grant to change his motion is stunning to me. I mean, but anyway, just real quick, I want to know that. And then secondly, I want to encourage all the pastors on here. I started at my new church on September the 19th. And Sunday, I told the church briefly about this during my pastoral prayer time and asked them to trust me which I understand is a monumental ask for a first week pastor. And tomorrow night during our Bible study, I'm going to explain all of this to them. And I would encourage all of you to do the same, not to stir up controversy and not to run people down through the mud. But, you know, we've heard Jen, we've heard Jules. Please forgive me, sister, if I said your name wrong. Maybe it's Julie. I'm sorry. But
No, it's Jules.
this has got to stop. This has got to stop. And the only way it's going to stop is if pastors stand up and say it's going to stop. So
Yeah,
that's my plea to my brothers and sisters too. You sisters have influence in ways that we don't. Also,
absolutely.
we're all in this together. So anyway, I'm dangerously close to rambling. Griffin, you understand that problem as a fellow pastor. I yield the
Yeah.
floor. Thank you.
Golly,
Thank
how
you so
long have we
much.
been on this call? This is my rambling ability is turned up to 100 right now. I think you guys stopped sending me emojis when I said that. I think that I want to say to your last point about sisters speaking up. I've seen a lot of pastors posting about this on social media, and the devastating, heartbreaking reality is that on nearly every Facebook post I've seen from pastors, their church members who I do not know and have never met have been sharing their stories of being sexually abused by their church member parents, family members, or pastors. And that is heartbreaking. We would be mistaken to think only a small group of victims who are incredibly vocal compose the subject of this investigation. This is a larger problem than others would have us believe. In terms of how to act, now I'm going to try and speak objectively here. I have not been objective up to this point. I've made my my position pretty clear. But in terms of how to act, for all of our Southern Baptist Convention entities, the trustees bear final authority on the hiring and firing of their executive level staff members. Ronnie Floyd's employment is subject to the trustees of the executive committee. Now, something interesting that has happened is that he has faced incredible criticism, both from those who wish for a waiver of privilege, as well as even publicly criticized on Twitter by Rod Martin, who is no fan of some of the things we're advocating here on this chat. And the reason they faced criticism is because they've not been transparent. They've not been passing along the needed information. They have not even been informing EC trustees of needed information. In fact, they settled out of court with Jen Lyle in her abuse case last year. And Rod said, I didn't even find out about that until Jen told me, which I think everybody is frustrated by that kind of information. Additionally, you have various other groups who are frustrated. So the trustees have the final authority here. Now, there are mechanisms to replace trustees at the Southern Baptist Convention, of course. And I understand Jen Lyle warned us about this. She said, if this all fails, don't say, see you in Anaheim. Continue advocating, continue fighting. There are mechanisms along the way. There are other EC meetings, and hypothetically, the trustees can do whatever they want. When we get to Anaheim, the messengers have the authority to replace trustees, add trustees, subtract trustees. So that's a mechanism as well. I talked earlier about the relational dynamics of the Southern Baptist Convention. You have to understand how the SBC works relationally. I'm a former employee of a Southern Baptist Convention entity. I'm not going to share any stories about that entity, but just suffice it to say, I've seen how these relationships work. And for the most part, I think the relational factor of how the Southern Baptist Convention works to our benefit. Our leaders are not just they're not just colleagues. They're not just fellow employees of the convention. They're friends. They're co-laborers in the gospel. They have the sort of affinity and love for one another that you see represented in the New Testament between Paul and his co-laborers. And I think that's a good thing. But it's also going to play a critical role when this is over. Because if we mishandle this, or a decision is made to utterly resist the will of the messengers, this has grave and major implications for our Southern Baptist Convention seminaries. This has grave and major implications for all of our entities with any lawsuits, because we've argued in court repeatedly. We are 50-0. The lawyers keep bragging at winning lawsuits that say we're not a top-down convention, we're a bottom-up convention. Well, it certainly doesn't look like we're a bottom-up convention right now. looks to me like the messengers make suggestions, the executive make decisions, the trustees overrule the messengers at their will. There are going to be major implications here that go beyond the opinions and preferences of the other entity leaders. And I think all eyes are going to turn to Al Mohler, to Jason Allen, to Hans Stillbeck, to Jamie Dew, to Danny Aiken, to Jeff George, to Adam Greenway, to look to other leaders and say, is this right? We know this summer, Adam Greenway shared with us how the EC essentially attempted a power grab against his own seminary last summer, as they removed trustees from their board who were actively working with Paige Patterson, with the Sandy Creek Foundation, to wrest control of $5 million and a private foundation and the company that funds the foundation away from Southwestern Seminary. I hope you all understand that there are leaders involved in this who have been actively working to harm the Southern Baptist Convention's entities. I hope you all understand that the Conservative Baptist Network, who is running a lot of the background on this resistance movement, is mostly composed of men and women who are now employed at Mid-America Baptist Theological Seminary in Memphis. They're receiving a paycheck from there. They're hosting their conferences there. These are men and women who previously had no connection to that seminary, but who have joined together around this resistance movement, who works in the shadows. Their leadership was fully on site at the EC meeting last week, posting pictures of themselves, talking about meeting with trustees. That group and this EC has been actively working against some of our other entities. And frankly, just objectively, I think that when this is over, that any objective watcher would have to look at Ronnie Floyd and say, your leadership on this has been a failure. And it is time for us to turn our eyes to the real leaders. It's time for us to turn our eyes to the other trusted voices and ask them to give us an answer. And frankly, I don't remember a time in the Southern Baptist Convention in the last 10 years when I've been active in it where our leaders have been hesitant to speak their mind. In fact, I have turned to Al Mohler, I've turned to Jason Allen, I've turned to Danny Aiken, I've turned to Jamie Dew, I've turned to Hans. Well, I've never turned to Hans Dillbeck. That's only because I knew who he was about a year ago. But I've turned to O.S. Hawkins. I've turned to Jeff George. I've turned to these other leaders as people that I can trust in my own pastoral ministry, in my own life, on moral and ethical issues of our day. And if they don't have an opinion, on how our convention handles sexual abuse, if they don't have an opinion on how the executive committee ignores our messengers, if they don't have an opinion on the gross lack of transparency, on the utter ridiculousness that is happening at the highest level of our convention right now, then maybe they're not who I thought they were. But I'll say this, I think they are. I think that those men are men of courage. I don't think they're perfect. I've disagreed with some of them at various times. I trust them. I appreciate Al Mohler has stood with Jen Lyle. Al Mohler has on the record said, I am listening to Rachel Denhollander. These men are not perfect, but I think we deserve an answer from all of them after that. And the relational dynamic of the Southern Baptist Convention should lead us in the days ahead. And frankly, and I'm going to go back to being opinionated now. If this goes the way that we think that it's going to go, and they refuse to waive privilege and they refuse to be transparent, and this dumpster fire continues to rage on, they need to tell Ronnie Floyd to resign, and they need to tell him to step down. And we may already be at that point, but I hope that they will speak up and be the men that we have trusted them to be. Dave Miller, you are on. You are connecting right now, but you are welcome to speak once you're connected. Dana, do you have anything to say hearing that? I mean, am I totally off base?
I share all of your concerns, obviously, and one thing you touched on a little while ago that that I think is important is Jen Lyle's exhortation to us to not simply sit back on our haunches and say, see you in Anaheim. Because I think there is a lot of discussion that needs to take place between those of us who share these concerns and share this perspective and friends of ours who you rightly described as co-laborers for the gospel, um, who are maybe on the EC and are going to be making decisions on an ongoing basis about who their leadership is, or how different phases of this whole saga play out. We need to continue to speak with boldness, speak with clarity, and speak with conviction, but speak in a spirit that allows those people that we have relationships with to hear us and to hear our hearts and to hopefully be persuaded by the truth and to have their vision of this unclouded, because there are people, unfortunately, who have intentionally clouded the vision of some of the decision makers who are in that executive session right now. The friend that I told you that I spoke with earlier talked about the bullying that went on prior to their vote last week, that person described as pretty intense bullying. And I couldn't help but think about that, Griffin, when you were talking about the number of sort of peripheral players who made it their business to come to Nashville and hang around and be a part of the dialogue on the fringes of that. Griffin, are you speaking? Because we can't hear you. Your signal's bad. Still
Out
can't hear
here.
you. Nope. Where's Bart Barber with a good agricultural metaphor? We need him. So anyway, while Griffin's trying to get his signal back, I'll just say it's very difficult. I mean, you all know me. You've read my work and you've heard me speak publicly and privately and in gatherings like these. And I'm pretty straightforward. And I pray that the Lord puts a guard over my mouth and keeps me from speaking out of my flesh and instead allows me to speak, based on how the Spirit would instruct me. But while we do that, though, we've got to keep our eye on the ball, and it's very disorienting for me to have to advocate for truth within the body of Christ. I am very accustomed to having to advocate for truth out in a lost and dying world. I'm very accustomed to having to keep my game face on and my eye on the ball when I'm dealing with people who do not have a relationship with Christ. It's very, disorienting for me to have to um, approach these conversations and these conflicts with that same mindset. But I think it's sort of what's required right now, um, sadly. But I also know that our Lord is faithful. And I know that He will give us the strength and the focus and the clarity with which to do that. And I know that He will inhabit the conversations that He will ordain for us to have with people who are sitting around those tables, who do have a vote right now today, to hopefully move their hearts and their minds as we feel strongly that the Lord would have them to go. Um, so I could ramble all day about this, and no one wants to listen to me do it, I'm sure. So I don't know if there's someone else who has something on their heart that they think they should share that would be helpful to everyone else. Griffin sort of has the controls for letting people in and out of speaking and listening roles. So feel free to raise your hand however that happens. I'm still new to this.